Good morning, government students. Today we will be doing notes 1.2, that is Unit 1, and our second set of notes, Origins of American Government. Your essential question: what basic concepts of American government were held by American colonists? Remember, you are doing your notes either in a notebook or you can do them as a Google Doc. I will provide questions if you want to do Cornell Notes style notes. For each section, I'll provide guiding questions, but it's up to you what style of notes you want to take. Remember, we're going to turn them all in next Wednesday when we take our assessment. So I'm going to go ahead and present these notes now and turn on the closed captions. All right, so some guiding questions if you'd like to write them down about our political beginnings. So this is going to be kind of a history lesson when we're talking about the government, because we have to talk about where our government came from and where we got the ideas to create our Constitution. So the first document that inspired us was from way back in 1215. This was the Magna Carta that was written in England. So this was actually written as a document to guarantee rights of Englishmen, and it was forced upon their king, who was King John at the time, to sign. It was the most significant influence on constitutional law that we have created in the United States, and it protected certain rights of people who were in England, the king's subjects, notably the right of habeas corpus, which means they had the right against unlawful imprisonment. So that means they had to have legal procedures. So the right to a fair trial, things like that we have in the United States today. But three of the main concepts that the English brought over to America with them was the need for some sort of government. So we need to have some sort of structured system in society, flawed as it may be, we need to have it in order to have a society. Two is a limited government. We cannot have an all-powerful government. We did not want to have a king that ruled us all and we all had to abide by his rules. And the third was a representative government. So we wanted representatives to serve the will of the people. We wanted a democracy. These are some of those guiding documents that helped the United States create our documents that we have today and where we got the ideas from. So all of these down here in the box for rights, these are all rights that you have in the United States again today, and we got those rights from documents that we learned about in history. When we started out, we were 13 colonies. We were a part of England. We were under direct rule of the English monarchy, so we were under the rule of the king. The charter colonies were mostly self-governed. They really tended to leave us alone until they needed more money. This is a map of the 13 colonies, what they look like today. We also call this territory New England because it was the new colonies, a new section of England once it was first created. Until about the mid-1700s, we were pretty much left alone. We were given a lot of freedom from the British, from the king, but in 1760, King George decided that he wanted to implement new taxes and new laws on the colonists. The British were fighting a very expensive war in the middle of the United States, or what we now call the United States, the French and Indian War, or the 7-Year War, and they needed to have money to fight that war, so they decided to tax the American colonists. The colonists started a confederation, they proposed they create their own Congress, and they began to rebel. The first of these rebellions, or perhaps the most famous, was the Boston Massacre. So a lot of American colonists began to get a little rowdy one day when they were at the pub. They saw a bunch of British soldiers, and they started throwing bottles at them. And so the British soldiers responded by shooting upon these people. So they ended up killing 5 people and 1 dog, which is why you can see the little dog down here in the corner. So it's 5 people and 1 dog. And the first person that was actually killed was this man here on the left side. His name is Crispus Attucks. Crispus Attucks was an African American citizen of Boston, and he was the first one killed in the Boston Massacre. So the colonists began to gather together. They joined a confederation in order to decide how they were going to get rid of this British rule that they found so oppressive. They called themselves the Stamp Act Congress after the Stamp Act that was passed. It was one of the taxes that was passed on the colonists. And they prepared a Declaration of Rights and Grievances against the British policies and sent it to the king. So this was pretty much like a list of complaints that they had with the British, the unfair treatment that they were being subject to without any representation. So they were successful in repealing that Stamp Act on March 18th, 1776, but the British government affirmed its power to legislate in all cases whatsoever, so then more taxes followed after that. So the First Continental Congress was in 1774. That's where these people, who would become known as the Founding Fathers, started to gather together to create a list of complaints to send to King George. They decided they were going to stop trading at all with the British, not pay any of their taxes, and regulate trade until these taxes were repealed or recalled. So they met again in 1775, the Second Continental Congress. They met together and formed a draft of the Declaration of Independence from Britain. So they finalized this on July 4th, 1776, this document called the Declaration of Independence. That is why we consider July 4th to be America's birthday, because that is the day that we declared that we were our own independent country from England. Between the next 2 years, most states adopted their own state constitutions. And the Second Continental Congress would serve as the first government of the United States for the first 5 years. But the British were not ready to give up on us quite yet. These were the common features of most state constitutions at the time, so limited government, making sure there was no king, providing rights to people, separating powers so that not all one group was all powerful, and then having popular sovereignty, so having the right to rule their nation or their state as they saw fit. So the critical period of the United States, we had just formed our own nation. We created a document called the Articles of Confederation. And this established what we called a firm league of friendship among the states. So this gave the United States, the newly formed United States, the power to declare war, to deal with financial issues, settle disputes among the states. Congress could do all of those things. And the states had to promise to obey Congress and respect the laws of other states. It was really, most of the power was retained to the states, not to the national government. So Congress could declare war and raise an army, but Congress couldn't tax. And if you don't have the power to tax, you don't have the ability as a government to pay for anything. That's how we pay for our military today. That's how we pay for our education that we're using right now. So unfortunately, the Articles of Confederation were not very strong because of the inability to tax. So they needed to be modified in some way. So they decided to have all 13 states meet together again at the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia. And they were going to create a new document called the Constitution. So these were some of the people that were in attendance. Our founding fathers like George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, James Madison. All these people were there at the Constitutional Convention. Thomas Jefferson was actually not there, although he wrote the Declaration of Independence. He was not there because he was in France helping out with the French Revolution. So there was two different plans for our Constitution, the Virginia Plan and the New Jersey Plan. The Virginia Plan wanted 3 distinct branches of government. It wanted a 2-house legislature. It wanted to have some sort of national executive and a national judiciary. And it wanted representation based on population. New Jersey, on the other hand, only wanted 1 house of Congress, and they wanted equal representation for all states of different sizes. So they decided to compromise on this. The Connecticut Compromise was to have 2 different houses of Congress, which is what we have today. So we have 2 different houses, the House of Representatives, which is based on population, and then we have the Senate, which is equal for each state. So these 2 houses make up Congress, and it was the compromise between these 2 plans. Next, they had to deal with the issue of slavery. So the 3/5 compromise is what they came up with. The framers decided to count all enslaved people as 3/5 of a person when it came to determining the population of a state. So for the House of Representatives, we have to do a census every 10 years and we count all the people who live in that state for population purposes for representation in the House. So they decided they were going to also count all the enslaved people, but they were only going to count them as 3/5 of a person. So if they had 500 enslaved people in a given state, they would count it as 300 people. They also said that they would not tax any exported goods. And although the issue of slavery was still a massive issue at the time, states in the North, many had gotten rid of slavery at that point. They saw how horrible of a system it was, but states in the South still wanted it. So they decided they were not going to do anything about slavery for 20 years, and they would revisit the issue in 1807. So they did end up signing the Constitution in Philadelphia, September 17th, 1787. This is what it looks like, all the signatures. You can still go see it in Washington, D.C. today. And it had mixed reviews, as most things do. Benjamin Franklin said it was near to perfection. So it says within it, it is supposed to be created to make us a more perfect union. So it's never going to be perfect, but hopefully we're always improving as a nation. And ratifying the Constitution. So once it was passed, once it was signed, it then had to be passed by ratification. So we had people on both sides trying to argue on whether we should pass this or not. So this became our first two political parties. We have a two-party system now in the United States, hence our upcoming election. Two different political parties, and the first two political parties we ever had were here, the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. The Federalists thought the Articles of Confederation were weak. They argued for ratification of the Constitution. And the Anti-Federalists objected to the Constitution. They did not like the strong central government, and they didn't like that it didn't have a Bill of Rights. So the Federalists supported the Constitution. The Anti-Federalists did not support the Constitution. If any of you are interested, Hamilton actually has a rap battle about this. So rap battle number 1 is on the Federalist versus Anti-Federalist Constitution, supporting it or not. But it did end up getting ratified, which is why we have a Constitution that we are studying today. So supporters of the Constitution published a series of essays that were anonymous called the Federalist Papers that they printed out and then they handed out to people so people would support this new Constitution. So our new Congress met for the first time on March 4th, 1789. George Washington was elected our very first president and was inaugurated on April 30th. And that is the end of your notes for today. So don't forget to write a summary at the end. You just need a couple sentences. And that's it. Thank you.